There's a legend that drifts through these coastal towns, one that fishermen still recount when fog blankets the harbor and the sea grows restless. I've told it countless times, tried to capture the essence of what unfolded that stormy autumn of 2018, but somehow words never quite do it justice. Still, this story needs telling, a tale of theft, valor, and how the gentlest tide can conceal the deepest currents. Before we cast off into the past, tell me where you're watching from, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extraordinary just for you. Port Haven wasn't much to look at, just another weathered fishing village clinging to the jagged Maine coastline like barnacles to a hull. The kind of place where dreams wash in with the morning tide and wash out with the evening, they used to say. A single harbor road lined with salt-stained buildings, a lighthouse that hadn't guided anyone home in years, and the Salty Dog Tavern, that did more business than all other establishments combined. But beneath those gray waters lay something that men would risk everything for: bluefin tuna, Atlantic lobster, and during the right season, catches that could set a fisherman up for months. Roots and fishing grounds that had been passed down through generations, sustaining the lifeblood of Port Haven, despite the endless push of corporate trawlers trying to claim those waters for themselves. Most locals can still remember how it was before the harbor wolves moved in. Port Haven wasn't wealthy, but it was honest. Families worked their boats, mended their nets, and shared their bounties when times were good. That all changed the day Silas, the Captain Blackwell, and his crew motorized into the harbor, their sleek vessels a stark contrast to the weathered fishing boats that had always called Port Haven home. They came like a nor'easter, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. Working through the proper channels at first, Harbor Master Jensen, God rest his corrupted soul, played right into their hands, helping them secure prime docking spaces and exclusive rights to certain waters for pennies on the dollar. Those who wouldn't cooperate, well, boats have a way of developing mechanical issues out on the open sea. The Donovans were the first to learn that harsh reality. Their trawler was found adrift, engine destroyed beyond repair. By the time the Coast Guard towed them back, they'd lost their catch and their livelihood in one cruel stroke. The Martinezes were next, then the Calhouns. Each time, Harbor Master Jensen would file his reports and declare it another unfortunate accident. Everyone in Port Haven knew better, but knowing and proving are different creatures entirely, especially when the local sheriff had suddenly acquired a boat he could never afford on his salary. That's how things stood when she arrived at the harbor, tying up at the last available slip in the marina. Nobody paid much mind to the woman in the faded captain's hat, another drifter with a modest fishing boat looking to scrape by in unforgiving waters. She registered her vessel as the Second Wind, a 36-foot trawler that had seen better days but was maintained with military precision. Elena Hayes, she called herself, though some would later say that name was just another current in a sea of secrets. I remember the morning everything began to shift. The sun hadn't yet burned the mist off the water when Harbor Master Jensen was in his office, nursing his guilty conscience with a bottle of rum. Blackwell paid him an unexpected visit, bringing the smell of expensive cologne and implicit threats. The harbor master's hands shook as he tried to explain about the newcomer woman's boat occupying the slip they needed for their newest acquisition. "Just one woman," Jensen had stammered, rum courage failing him. "Surely your boys can handle it." But Blackwell was smarter than that. His reputation for calculated cruelty was matched only by his business acumen. "This needs to be clean," he said, voice carrying that distinctive authority that had cowed stronger men than Jensen. Legal-like. Fishing writes that pure brings questions, and questions bring authorities we don't need. So they sent the sheriff instead, Thomas Reynolds, a man who wore his badge like it was borrowed, heavy with the compromise of his integrity. He sauntered down to her slip that very morning with 2 deputies, found her working on an outboard, motor like she hadn't a care in the world. The morning light caught her just right, and for a moment she looked almost ethereal. like someone who belonged on a much larger bridge than the helm of a small fishing boat. Young Mike Foster was with him that day. Later, he'd tell me how she never seemed afraid, not even when they mentioned the harbor wolves. Just smiled, weathered and dangerous as a silent reef beneath calm waters. She took their envelope of money without opening it and promised to consider their offer. But there was something in her eyes that made Mike's skin prickle, something that didn't belong in the eyes of a simple fisherwoman. Margaret O'Malley, Maggie to most folks. She saw it too. Running the harbor supply store meant she saw everything that happened in Port Haven. She watched Elena walk into her store that same morning, that unopened envelope in her hand, moving with a precision that spoke of something more than just working fishing boats. Territories, Maggie had told her, voice barely above a whisper, glancing around her empty store like the walls might have ears. They've claimed them all. Every profitable ground within 50 miles. Blackwell's been buying out captains one way or another, and those who won't sell, they leave or they sink? Elena had asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew the answer. When they're lucky, Maggie's words hung in the salt-tinged air like approaching storm clouds. The Donovan boat was just the beginning, 12 families since spring. The Sullivan boy lost his arm when their hydraulics mysteriously failed. Last month, his father still wakes up screaming most nights. That's when something changed in Elena's eyes, a flash of steel beneath the fisherwoman's casual facade. Later, folks would say that was the moment everything truly began, though. None of us knew it then. The way she held herself shifted, just for a second, like a sailor accidentally revealing the insignia hidden beneath civilian clothes. That evening, she passed Blackwell and his men outside the Salty Dog. The way they watched her, like sharks, eyeing a wounded seal, would have made most women quicken their steps. But Elena, she kept her pace steady, even stopped when Blackwell called out to her, his men fingering their belt knives with poorly hidden anticipation. "Hope you're finding our little harbor accommodating, ma'am," Blackwell had said, voice dripping with false courtesy, the gold anchor pendant at his neck gleaming under the tavern lights. "Quite accommodating," she'd answered, head tilted just so, keeping her face shadowed by the brim of her worn captain's hat. "Though I hear the fishing grounds can be territorial. Only for those who don't understand the local arrangements." His hand had rested on the railing, casual as a barracuda in a reef. "Storm's coming. Hate to see anyone caught unprepared out there." "Don't worry about me, sir." She'd straightened her posture, the movement too practiced for a simple boat operator. "I always navigate the storm." Watching her walk away, even Blackwell felt something wasn't right. He sent Marcus Reed to watch her boat, learn her habits, figure out what angles to work. "Everyone in Port Haven is hiding something," he told his crew, eyes narrow with suspicion over the rim of his whiskey glass. "Question is, what's she hiding?" If he'd known the answer to that question, he might have cut his losses and disappeared while the tide was still in his favor. But that's getting ahead of our story. Folks say truth is a slippery thing along the coast, as changeable as the tide pools during a spring lunar pull. What seems clear in the morning light can shift into something altogether different come dusk. That's how it was with Elena Hayes. The more people watched her, the less they seemed to know. Marcus Reed spent 3 days studying her boat from the edge of the marina. He was the best scout the harbor wolves had, could read maritime patterns like most men read yesterday's news. But something about Elena's routine didn't add up. Each morning, she'd check her equipment, prepare her gear, and head out just like any fisherwoman. But there were moments, brief as a compass needle settling, when she'd pause, stance shifting, like she was instinctively responding to a roll of waves that weren't there, or listening for a command that no one had given. "She knows I'm watching," Reed told Blackwell on the 4th morning, his usual confidence faltering. "Don't ask me how, but she knows." Blackwell wasn't one to spook easily, but he'd learned to trust Reed's instincts. "What else?" "She navigates." "Too precisely." Reed paused, choosing his words with the care of a man disarming a mine. Doesn't use GPS much. Charts her course old school, but with military precision. And the way she handles that boat, it's too efficient. Like someone who's used to commanding much larger vessels. That caught Blackwell's attention. He was inspecting a new harpoon gun, a habit he had when deliberating. You think she's Coast Guard? Some kind of undercover operation? Coast Guard doesn't move like that, growled Victor Hammerhead Turner from his corner. The scar across his face twisted as he frowned. She's just some stubborn fish chaser who needs to learn the local pecking order. But Blackwell wasn't convinced. He remembered stories from his time running smuggling operations off the Carolina coast. Whispers about a female officer who had risen through the ranks with unprecedented speed, who could outmaneuver vessels twice her size and navigate by stars alone. Some said she'd commanded an entire task force before disappearing from naval records altogether. That same afternoon, Elena headed into town for supplies. The September chill had driven most folks indoors, leaving the harbor road nearly deserted, except for a few determined souls. Among them was Dr. Samuel Walsh, tending to young Tommy Sullivan's healing arm outside his clinic. "Afternoon, Ms. Hayes," the doctor called out as she passed. "How's that shoulder treating you? Naval injuries can be persistent." She reined in her steps, and those watching later swore they saw her hand instinctively move to her hip, where an officer's sidearm might once have rested. "I don't recall mentioning any naval service or shoulder injury, doctor." Her voice carried the slightest edge. The doctor's face went pale as fresh-caught halibut. "Must be thinking of another patient. Memory playing tricks at my age." Elena nodded, but her eyes had gone hard as tempered steel. "Must be." Inside the harbor supply store, Maggie O'Malley was waiting. She flipped the sign to closed, despite the early hour after Elena entered. "You've got trouble brewing," she said without preamble. Blackwell's brother Derek just arrived with fresh muscle on that black sport fishing yacht that pulled in last night. They're planning something. They usually are. Elena began selecting supplies with careful deliberation. Extra fuel stabilizer, waterproof flares, heavy gauge line. "Any word on the missing lobster traps from the Mackenzie family?" "Found them cut loose yesterday, drifting out past Widow's Point," Maggie's voice caught. "Sheriff won't even file a proper report." Elena's hand paused over a bin of marine grade shackles. How many did they lose? 58. Their entire livelihood, generational fishing spots. Marked with buoys their grandfather hand-painted. The silence that followed had weight to it, heavy as a waterlogged timber. When Elena finally spoke, her voice had changed. Gone was the casual tone of a small boat captain, replaced by something harder, more authoritative. "Tell me about Derek." "Blackwell. Meaner than his brother, but not half as smart. Ex-military dishonorably discharged after an incident. Likes to make examples of people." Maggie hesitated. "They say he's the one who personally sabotaged the Donovan boat. Made sure they were far enough out that they might not make it back." Elena nodded once, sharp as a ship's bell. "I think it's time I paid my respects to the harbor master. Been meaning to do that since I arrived." She found Jensen in his office, boots on his desk, flask tipped low like he was trying to drown something, inside himself. But his hand was never far from the drawer where he kept his registered firearm. "Ms. Hayes," he said without looking up. "Come to reconsider the relocation offer?" "Actually, I came to ask about the Mackenzie lobster traps." She remained in the doorway, saltwater shadows stretching across his cluttered desk. "Seems odd that 5 generations of careful fishing would suddenly result in 58 cut lines." "Lots of things can happen on the water." Jensen's boots hit the floor with a thud that echoed the guilt he tried to drown daily. "Propellers, other fishermen, or maybe just equipment failure. Or harbor wolves." Elena's laugh held no humor. "Like the wolves that crippled the Donovan boat. Or the wolves that sent Marcus Martinez to the hospital with 2 broken legs after." He refused to give up his grandfather's fishing roots. Jensen stood slowly, his face dark as an approaching squall. "You're new here, Ms. Hayes. Don't understand how things work on this stretch of coast. For your own safety, I suggest you take that money and find another port to call home." "Or what, harbor master? Accidents happen all the time at sea." He moved around the desk, trying to use his height to intimidate. "Sometimes to people who ask too many questions." But Elena didn't back down. If anything, she seemed to grow taller, her presence filling the small office like an incoming tide. "Yes, they do. But so do other things. Things that make accidents look like child's play." She left him standing there, the threat hanging between them like a baited hook. Outside, the harbor had grown busier. Derek Blackwell and his newly arrived crew were making their presence known, intimidating local fishermen, harassing dock workers. Elena watched them from the boardwalk, her expression hidden by the shadow of her cap. Young Mike Foster hurried up to her, his deputy's badge catching the afternoon light like a distress signal. "Ms. Hayes," he said, voice low and urgent. "You need to be careful. Derek's different from Silas. Doesn't care about appearances or keeping things quiet." "I appreciate the warning, deputy." She touched the brim of her hat in acknowledgement. "But I learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous predator isn't the one making all the noise." As if to prove her point, Derek Blackwell chose that moment to notice her. He swaggered over, reeking of expensive bourbon and cheap cologne. "Well, well. You must be the stubborn little lady giving my brother such trouble." Derek's voice carried the practiced menace of a man used to others backing down. "Mr. Blackwell," she nodded politely. "I wasn't aware claiming my legal fishing rights was trouble." "Everything's trouble around here, sweetheart." He reached for her arm. "Until you learn how to be friendly like." What happened next was so quick most folks who saw it still argue about the details. Derek's hand never reached her. Somehow, he ended up doubled over, gasping for breath, though Elena hadn't appeared to move at all. "My apologies," she said, calm as an anchored vessel. "I'm rather particular about who touches me." She walked away, leaving Derek wheezing in the salt air. But those who looked close might have noticed something. For just a moment, her jacket had shifted, revealing the faint outline of naval insignia tattooed on her wrist, the kind that denoted command rank, not something a simple fisherwoman would carry. The war was about to begin in earnest, though none of us knew it then. We just knew that something had changed, like the shift in barometric pressure before a hurricane. And in Port Haven, hurricanes had a way of turning deadly. The thing about pride is it can make a man do foolish things, especially when it's been wounded in public. Derek Blackwell had been humiliated in front of the whole harbor, and that kind of shame demands retribution. But Silas, he knew better than to let his brother's rage dictate their moves. He'd built his empire on calculation, on choosing the right moment to strike. That evening, the harbor wolves gathered at their compound overlooking the water. The lighthouse beam painted their faces in rhythmic strokes of light and darkness as Derek paced, still nursing his bruised ribs and fractured ego. "We should sink her boat tonight," he snarled. "Show everyone what happens when you cross the Blackwells. And bring every Coast Guard cutter within 100 miles down on us?" Silas cleaned his diving knife with practiced precision. "No. There's something about this woman we're missing." Marcus Reed shifted uncomfortably. "Been asking around. Nobody knows where she came from. No family, no history in these waters. But here's the strange part. She paid for her slip in cash. New bills, sequential, government money." "Told you. She was a Fed," Hammerhead Turner muttered. "Has to be Coast Guard or worse." "Maybe." Silas chambered around in his personal sidearm, the click echoing in the darkness. "Or maybe she's something else entirely. Remember those stories about that female commander during the Gulf operations? The one they called the Phantom. Admiral?" Derek snorted. "That's just maritime gossip. Besides, they said she retired years ago after that classified incident off Somalia." "Did she?" Silas stood, his shadow stretching tall against the lighthouse wall. Or was that just what we were meant to believe? Either way, we need to know what we're dealing with. Jake? Jake the Hook. Peterson stepped forward. He was the harbor wolves' best scout, claiming he could track a specific fish through a school of thousands. Yeah, boss? Time to introduce yourself to the lady. Nothing too obvious. Just get her talking, see if you can get on her boat, check for anything unusual. But Jake never got the chance. As he prepared to head down to the docks the next morning, young Tommy Sullivan came running into the compound, face white as sea foam. The Mackenzies! They found their lobster traps! The news spread through Port Haven like wildfire. 58 lobster traps, freshly baited and intact, had mysteriously reappeared in their traditional grounds before dawn. But more than that, they'd been filled with prime catch, more than a week's normal haul. They told a tale that set every tongue in town wagging. Someone had recovered and repositioned their traps in the dark of night. Someone who knew exactly where the traditional grounds were, who could navigate without lights in dangerous waters, who could handle hundreds of pounds of equipment alone in shifting tides. It was like a ghost ship, Old Man Mackenzie told Dr. Walsh as he checked the elder's heart rate, stressed from the excitement. 1 minute our livelihood was gone, the next it's back, better than before. Found this note attached to the primary buoy. The note, written in a flowing hand that spoke of formal education. Your legacy is preserved. Justice surfaces at first. Light. When Sheriff Reynolds heard the news, he rode straight to Elena's slip, 2 deputies in tow. They found her mending a net, looking for all the world like she'd been at that task since sunrise. Quite a story the Mackenzies are telling, Reynolds said, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Wonderful news for them, Elena tested the net with practiced fingers. Their family has fished these waters for generations. Would be a shame to lose that heritage. Funny you should mention. Heritage. Reynolds dismounted, boots hitting the dock with a hollow thud. Seems someone with exceptional maritime knowledge and night navigation skills returned their traps. Not many folks around here could manage that feat single-handedly. Elena's hands never paused in their work. Perhaps Port Haven has more skilled mariners than the harbor wolves give credit for. Before the sheriff could respond, the marina radio crackled to life with an urgent broadcast, a mayday call from a vessel in distress 12 miles offshore. The voice was unmistakable. Jake. Peterson, in a panic. Mayday! Mayday! This is the Lucky Strike! Taking on water after collision with something. Position 43 degrees 24 minutes north, 69 degrees 53 minutes west. Need immediate assistance. The harbor erupted into controlled chaos. The Coast Guard station was a full hour away by water. Local captains exchanged glances. That area was notorious for hidden shoals and dangerous currents. Few would risk their vessels there, especially with a storm front approaching from the northeast. Everyone watched as Elena calmly stowed her net, checked her weather radar, and began prepping her boat for immediate departure. You're not seriously going out there? Sheriff Reynolds asked, disbelief evident in his voice. Someone's in trouble, she replied simply, casting off lines with practiced efficiency. That's Harbor Wolves' business. Derek Blackwell had appeared on the dock, his face twisted with suspicion. Jake's one of ours. We'll handle our own. Elena's eyes met his, calm as the eye of a hurricane. The sea doesn't care who you belong to, Mr. Blackwell, and neither does maritime law. With that, she fired up her engines and navigated out of the slip with a precision that made several old captains exchange knowing glances. No ordinary fisherwoman handled a boat like that, with the economy of movement that spoke of thousands of hours commanding vessels in all conditions. As she cleared the harbor breakwater, the gathering storm clouds cast her boat in an ominous silhouette. Several witnesses later claimed they saw her stand at the helm, not hunched against the rising wind, but erect, face into the gale, like someone accustomed to facing nature's fury from the bridge of something much larger than a fishing trawler. Silas Blackwell watched her departure, through high-powered binoculars, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Hammerhead Turner spat into the harbor waters. She's walking right into it. Jake will lead her straight to the ambush point. But Silas wasn't so certain. Maybe, he muttered, more to himself than his lieutenant. Or maybe we just sent a lamb to slaughter the wolves. The storm closed in around the harbor, bringing early darkness and the distant rumble of thunder. Port Haven held its breath, waiting for word from the waters beyond the sheltering arms of the bay. Something was about to break, and it wouldn't be just the approaching storm. In the harbormaster's office, Jensen paced nervously, radio clutched in white-knuckled hands. The Mackenzies' recovered traps, Jake's suspicious distress call, Elena's too perfect seamanship. The pieces were forming a picture he didn't want to see. 3 hours passed with no word from either Jake's vessel or Elena's rescue attempt. The storm had intensified, driving most of Port Haven indoors, but a small crowd still gathered at the harbor office, hunched against the driving rain. Among them were the Mackenzies, Maggie O'Malley, and several other fishing families whose livelihoods had been threatened by the harbor wolves. Coast Guards launched from Portsmouth, Jensen announced, still clutching the radio. But in this weather, they're at least 2 hours out. She shouldn't have gone alone, Old Man Mackenzie muttered, his weathered face lined with concern. Experienced or not, those waters are treacherous in a nor'easter. Who says she's alone? Maggie's quiet words drew curious glances. Before anyone could question her meaning, the radio crackled to life. Port Haven Harbor Control, this is Second Wind. Elena's voice cut through the static, calm and measured, despite the howling wind audible in the background. I have visual on Lucky Strike. Proceeding with rescue operations, over. Jensen fumbled with the handset. Second Wind, this is Harbor Control. Conditions deteriorating rapidly. Coast Guard recommends you hold position until their arrival. Over. A long pause followed, punctuated only by static and the storm's rage. Negative. Harbor Control. Lucky Strike is taking on water rapidly. No time to wait. I'm going in. Over. The gathered crowd exchanged glances. Such a rescue would be challenging for a full crew in good conditions. For one woman in a storm-tossed sea, it bordered on suicidal. What's she thinking? Sheriff Reynolds muttered, shaking his head. She's thinking like a captain, came a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Dr. Walsh, rain dripping from his slicker. A captain never leaves someone in distress, regardless of personal risk. She's not a captain, Reynolds countered. She's just a... Is she? The doctor interrupted, his expression unreadable. The radio fell silent for 20 long minutes. The storm continued to build, rattling the harbor office windows with increasing fury. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice broke through. Harbor Control, this is Lucky Strike. Jake Peterson's voice trembled, either from cold or fear. Second Wind has secured our vessel. We're making 7 knots toward harbor. Estimate arrival in 40 minutes. Over. A collective murmur ran through the crowd. 7 knots in these conditions, while towing a disabled vessel? It defied maritime logic. She must be pushing that engine beyond safety limits, Jensen said, shaking his head in disbelief. Or she knows exactly what her vessel can handle, Dr. Walsh countered quietly. As word spread through Port Haven, more locals braved the storm to gather at the marina. By the time the running lights of 2 vessels appeared through the driving rain, nearly half the town stood watching from whatever shelter they could find. Elena's Second Wind entered the harbor first, navigating the narrow channel with unerring precision, despite near-zero visibility. Behind her, attached by a tow line, came Jake Peterson's Lucky Strike, listing badly but still afloat. The skilled Maneuvering required to bring both vessels safely to dock in such conditions left even veteran captains murmuring in appreciation. As Elena secured her boat, Jake Peterson was helped ashore by the gathered crowd. The harbor wolf scout looked shell-shocked, his usual swagger replaced by the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd stared death in the face. "What happened out there?" Sheriff Reynolds demanded, as Silas and Derek Blackwell pushed through the crowd. Jake's eyes darted to his employers, then back to the sheriff. "Hit something. Started taking on water. Radioed for help." "And then?" Reynolds pressed. Jake swallowed hard. "And then she showed up. Like she knew exactly where to find me, despite the storm. Came alongside in conditions that should have capsized both of us." "Lucky coincidence," Derek Blackwell cut in, glaring at his subordinate. "No." Jake shook his head emphatically. "Not luck. She knew. Came straight to my position, no searching, like she'd tracked me somehow." All eyes turned to Elena as she calmly stepped onto the dock, seemingly unaffected by the hour's battling. 20-foot swells and gale-force winds. Her movements were precise, economical, the practiced motion of someone who'd faced far worse than a New England storm. "Ms. Hayes," Sheriff Reynolds approached her. "Mind explaining how you managed to find a vessel in distress in zero-visibility conditions?" Elena secured her final line before answering. "Old naval trick. Sound travels differently through water currents. If you know how to listen, the sea tells you where to go." "Naval trick?" Silas Blackwell stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Interesting choice of words for a simple fisherwoman. The crowd fell silent, the only sound the howling wind and rain battering the harbor. Elena turned to face Blackwell fully, and something in her stance made several onlookers step back involuntarily. "We all have pasts, Mr. Blackwell," her voice carried easily despite the storm. "Some more decorated than others." Before Silas could respond, Jake suddenly lurched forward, pointing an accusing finger at Elena. "She knew," he shouted. "She knew it wasn't an accident. When she came aboard, she went straight to the hull breach. Didn't even have to look for it. Took one glance and said, 'Clean entry point, professional job.' How would she know that unless—" Derek Blackwell grabbed his subordinate by the collar. "You're delirious from the cold, Jake. Let's get you inside." But the damage was done. The gathered crowd began murmuring among themselves, connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated. "Are you saying the distress call was fake?" Reynolds asked, hand moving to his service weapon. "Not fake," Elena replied calmly. "Manufactured. The lucky strike didn't hit anything. It was deliberately sabotaged to draw me out. A small shaped charge against the hull, military grade if I had to guess. Detonated remotely once the vessel reached the designated coordinates." The specificity of her assessment silenced the crowd. These weren't the observations of a fisherwoman, but the professional analysis of someone intimately familiar with maritime sabotage. "That's a serious accusation." Silas Blackwell's voice had gone dangerously soft. "Especially coming from someone we know so little about. Elena Hayes, if that's even your real name." Elena's smile never reached her eyes. "Would you prefer to call me by my former rank, Mr. Blackwell? Or would that make our interactions here too official?" A visible ripple of tension ran through the Blackwell brothers. Silas recovered first, his businessman's smile sliding back into place. "I'm sure we're all grateful for Ms. Hayes' heroic rescue, regardless of her background. Jake clearly needs medical attention after his ordeal. Doctor, if you wouldn't mind." Dr. Walsh stepped forward, but his eyes lingered on Elena with something like recognition. "Of course. Though I suspect Ms. Hayes could provide better field treatment than I could. Naval officers receive extensive medical training, especially those in command positions." The doctor's words hung in the rain-soaked air like a challenge. Elena gave him a barely perceptible nod before turning her attention back to the Blackwells. "You staged quite a performance, gentlemen. Risked one of your own men in treacherous conditions, all to lure me away from harbor." Her gaze shifted to the far end of the marina where her slip was located. I wonder what I'll find when I return. To my boat. Or rather, what I won't find. Derek's hand moved to the concealed weapon at his waist, but Silas stopped him with a subtle gesture. I'm afraid I don't follow, Ms. Hayes. Silas's voice remained perfectly controlled, the consummate businessman, don't you? Elena glanced meaningfully at the 3 Harbor Wolves crew members who had just appeared at the marina entrance, carrying heavy gear bags that hadn't been there before the storm. While Jake here played distressed sailor and I played rescuer, I imagine your other men were quite busy with my vessel, searching for something? Or perhaps planting something? The tension in the air thickened. Several of the local fishermen had moved to stand behind Elena, creating an unconscious division in the crowd. Harbor Wolves and their sympathizers on one side, independent Port Haven residents on the other. Silas assessed the situation with calculating eyes before offering an easy laugh that didn't reach his expression. I think the heroic rescue has left Ms. Hayes a bit paranoid, understandable after such an ordeal. Perhaps we should all get out of this weather and continue our conversation somewhere drier. An excellent suggestion, Elena agreed, though her posture remained vigilant. Though I'll need to check my vessel first. Make sure the storm hasn't caused any unexpected damage. As the crowd began to disperse, Maggie O'Malley approached Elena, speaking in an urgent whisper. They were on your boat, 3 of them, spent at least 30 minutes below deck. I know, Elena replied softly. That was the point. Maggie's eyes widened. You knew it was a trap and you went anyway? Why? Elena's gaze followed the retreating forms of the Blackwell brothers. Because sometimes you need to set a trap of your own. The 2 women walked toward Elena's slip, where the second wind rocked gently against its moorings, deceptively peaceful after battling the open ocean. As they approached, Elena paused, studying her vessel with expert eyes. They've been thorough, she noted, pointing out nearly invisible signs of entry that only someone with specialized training would notice. Pick the locks rather than breaking them. Professional job. What were they looking for? Maggie asked, nervously scanning the docks for watching eyes. Not what. Who? Elena ran her hand along the gunwale of her boat. They wanted to know who they're dealing with, and now they will. With practiced efficiency, Elena boarded her vessel and disappeared below deck. Moments later, she emerged with a small electronic device. Listening device, she explained, showing it to Maggie. Military grade, very expensive. They've planted at least 3 more below. Instead of disposing of the device, Elena pocketed it with a grim smile. Let's give them something to listen to. As they entered the main cabin, Elena switched on the lights and spoke in a clear, carrying voice. Harbor Control, this is Commander Elena Hayes, United States Navy, Bureau of Naval Intelligence, requesting secure line to Operation Director. Authentication code Sierra Echo Alpha Whiskey Alpha Lima. Lima. She paused, as if waiting for a response, then continued. Roger that. Situation has escalated as anticipated. Local criminal enterprise has taken action against federal operative. Request immediate dispatch of support team as outlined in mission parameters. Maggie watched with widening eyes as Elena conducted an entirely fabricated conversation with precision and authority that could not be faked. Affirmative. We'll maintain position and continue surveillance until backup arrives. Hayes out. She switched off the cabin lights and turned to Maggie with a finger to her lips. Leading the shop owner back outside, Elena spoke quietly. That should give them something to think about. By morning, half the Harbor Wolves will be looking for escape routes. But, Maggie looked confused. Was any of that real? Are you actually with naval intelligence? Elena's expression remained carefully neutral. What matters right now is that the Blackwells believe they've stumbled into something much bigger than strong-arming local fishermen. Fear is a powerful motivator, especially for men accustomed to being the ones inspiring it. The storm was beginning to ease, the worst of it moving inland. Elena looked out across the harbor to where the lighthouse beam cut through diminishing rainfall. "Tomorrow they'll make their move," she said with certainty. "Men like the Blackwells can't afford to leave threats unanswered." "What will you do?" Maggie asked, concern evident in her voice. Elena's smile was thin but genuine. "I'm going fishing." Dawn broke over Port Haven with unusual clarity after the storm, casting the harbor in shades of gold and revealing the lingering evidence of nature's fury. Debris scattered across docks, smaller vessels requiring bailing, and fishing gear needing repair. Despite the early hour and the previous night's drama, the marina buzzed with activity as crews assessed damage and prepared to salvage what remained of the day's fishing opportunities. The second wind's slip, however, was conspicuously empty. Word spread quickly through the weathered fishing community. Elena Hayes had departed before first light, slipping out of the harbor with the silence and efficiency that continued to fuel speculation about her true identity. Some claimed they'd seen her plotting an unusual course on her charts the night before. Others whispered that 3 unmarked vehicles had been spotted on the coastal road heading toward Port Haven just after midnight, only to disappear before reaching town. At the Salty Dog Tavern, Silas Blackwell held an urgent meeting with his inner circle. Their conversation carried out in tense whispers despite the early hour. "She's running," Derek insisted, nursing his third coffee, tension evident in the hard lines of his face. "Got spooked after we searched her boat, realized we're onto her." Silas remained unconvinced. "When have you ever known federal agents to retreat? Especially naval intelligence. They're like bulldogs once they latch onto something." Marcus Reed, still studying harbor charts spread across their table, looked up with concern, etching his features. "That authentication code she used. Sierra Echo Alpha, SEAWALL. Silas finished for him. "I caught that too. Operation Seawall." His expression darkened. "There were rumors about a joint task force with that designation 5 years ago. Anti-smuggling initiative that targeted criminal operations from Maine to the Carolinas. That operation was scrapped," Hammerhead Turner insisted, though uncertainty colored his words. "My contacts in Miami confirmed it." "Or that's what we were meant to believe." Silas stared into his untouched whiskey. "What if it just went deeper underground? What if Hayes isn't just some random agent but the architect of the whole operation?" Possibility hung heavy in the room until Jake Peterson burst through the tavern doors, still pale from his ordeal, but vibrating with urgent energy. "She's not running," he announced, dropping a folded nautical chart on their table. "This was left in my berth this morning." Silas unfolded the chart to reveal a section of coastline northeast of Port Haven. A precise circle had been drawn in, red around a small isolated cove known locally as Smuggler's Rest. A sheltered inlet with historically significant meaning for Maine's less-than-legal maritime traffic. "She's calling us out," Derek said, disbelief coloring his voice. "One woman against all of us?" "Or setting another trap," Silas countered, studying the chart with narrowed eyes. "This could be the perfect spot for a coordinated federal raid. Isolated, limited escape routes, easy to surround." "So we ignore it," Hammerhead suggested. "Let her wait out there while we clean house here." Silas traced the coastline with his finger, mind working through scenarios with the precision that had built his criminal empire. "No. If this is a genuine federal operation, running only confirms our guilt and ensures they'll never stop hunting us. But if it's just Hayes..." A cold smile spread across his face. "One agent acting alone presents certain opportunities." "What exactly are you thinking?" Derek leaned forward eagerly. "I'm thinking we accept her invitation," Silas replied. "But we bring overwhelming force. Every available man, armed and ready. If it's a trap, we'll have enough firepower to fight our way out. If it's just her..." He shrugged. Problem solved, and we send a message to anyone else thinking of interfering with our business. As the harbor wolves mobilized, word of Elena's departure and the unusual chart left for the Blackwells raced through Port Haven. By mid-morning, Sheriff Reynolds found himself facing an impromptu gathering outside his office. Local fishermen, shopkeepers, and families whose livelihoods had been threatened by the harbor wolf. "You can't just let them go after her," Maggie O'Malley argued, standing at the forefront of the group. "Everyone in town knows they're planning something. They've been loading weapons onto their boats all morning." Reynolds raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I can't arrest men for carrying legal firearms on their own vessels, Ms. O'Malley. And I certainly can't stop them from going fishing, which is all they claim to be doing." "Fishing?" Old Man Mackenzie spat. "With assault, rifles and body armor? Don't play us for fools, Thomas. You've been in their pocket too long to pretend ignorance now." The sheriff's face hardened. "Watch your accusations, Mackenzie. Badge or not, I won't stand for... For what? The truth?" Dr. Walsh pushed through the crowd. "I've treated 4 men this year for fishing accidents that were clearly beatings. I've watched you file reports that deliberately misrepresent crimes committed by the harbor wolves. The question is no longer whether you're corrupt, Sheriff. It's whether you can still remember what it means to uphold the law." Reynolds's hand drifted toward his holster, but the movement halted as he registered just how many townspeople had gathered, and the resolve in their expressions. "What exactly do you expect me to do?" he asked finally. "Hayes left willingly. The Blackwells have committed no crime today that I can prove. My hands are tied by the law." "The same law that's conveniently blind to sabotaged boats and extortion?" Maggie challenged. "At least be honest enough to admit you're afraid to stand against them." Before Reynolds could respond, Mike Foster pushed through the crowd, his deputy's badge catching the morning light. "Sheriff," he reported breathlessly. "Coast Guard just radioed. They're requesting our cooperation with a federal operation happening in our jurisdiction today, something about coordinating with their assets already in place." A murmur ran through the gathered townspeople. Reynolds' expression fluctuated between disbelief and alarm. "Did they specify what assets?" he asked carefully. Mike shook his head. "Just said we'd recognize them when we saw them and to offer any necessary support." In the uncertain silence that followed, Dr. Walsh stepped forward, his normally gentle demeanor replaced by something harder, more authoritative. "I think it's time I shared something with all of you," he announced. "Something I've been professionally obligated to keep confidential until now." All eyes turned to the town doctor as he removed an official-looking credential wallet from his coat pocket. "My name is indeed Samuel Walsh, and I am a licensed physician, but I'm also a medical consultant for the United States Navy, specializing in veterans care and operational readiness assessments." He opened the wallet to reveal a Department of Defense identification card. "3 weeks ago, I was contacted about a high-ranking naval officer who would be operating covertly in our area. I was instructed to provide any necessary medical support while maintaining her cover." "Her cover?" Reynolds echoed, his confidence visibly faltering. "Elena Hayes is not her real name," Walsh confirmed. "Though I'm not at liberty to reveal her actual identity, I can tell you this. She previously commanded a naval task force specialized in anti-smuggling and maritime law enforcement operations. After an incident that remains classified, she officially retired but has continued to work on special assignments targeting organized crime in coastal regions." The revelation sent a shock wave through the gathered crowd. Maggie O'Malley nodded slowly, as if pieces were finally falling into place. "So the rumors about federal involvement were true," she said. "But why come alone? Why not bring a full team from the beginning?" "Because she needed to confirm the extent of corruption before committing federal resources," Walsh explained, "including determining which local law enforcement officials could be trusted." His gaze fixed pointedly on Sheriff Reynolds, who had the good sense to look uncomfortable. "And now?" Mike Foster asked, unconsciously positioning himself apart from his sheriff. "Now, Walsh said grimly. She's drawn the harbor wolves out of Port Haven, away from potential civilian casualties, to a location where they can be contained and apprehended. Or where they could overwhelm and kill a single federal agent, Reynolds' countered. No matter how skilled she is, she's outnumbered at least 20-1. Unless that was part of her plan all along, Walsh replied cryptically. For a moment, the entire gathering fell silent, the only sound the distant cry of gulls, and the gentle lapping of waves against the harbor walls. Then Old Man Mackenzie stepped forward, his weathered face set with determination. I don't much care if she's Navy, Coast Guard, or the Queen of England, he declared. That woman saved my family's livelihood when no one else would. She went, out in a killer storm to rescue a man who was bait in a trap set for her. I won't stand by while the harbor wolves hunt her down. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. My boat's seaworthy, Mackenzie continued. Who's coming with me? One by one, hands raised across the gathering. Fishermen whose families had worked these waters for generations, shopkeepers who'd paid protection money to the Blackwells, parents whose children had been threatened or harmed. This is insanity, Reynolds protested. You're civilians. You can't just form a vigilante flotilla and confront armed criminals. Then come with us, Mike Foster challenged, removing his deputy badge and placing it deliberately on the sheriff's desk. Be the law you swore to uphold. Reynolds looked from the badge to the determined faces before him, the weight of years of compromise visible in his expression. You don't understand, he said quietly. The harbor wolves aren't just some local gang. They have connections, political protection, arrangements with people who can make problems disappear. People who've made it very clear what happens to those who interfere. We understand perfectly, Maggie replied. We've lived under that shadow for years while you looked the other way. The question is whether you're still capable of standing in the light. For a long moment, Reynolds seemed frozen in indecision. Then, with deliberate movements, he reached for his service weapon, checking its load before securing it in his holster. I'll take my own boat, he said finally. Faster that way. As the impromptu fleet prepared to depart, Dr. Walsh pulled Maggie and Mike aside. There's something else you should know, he said in a low voice. Elena, or whatever her real name, she didn't come completely alone. What do you mean? Maggie asked. Walsh glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. 2 nights ago, I treated a man for mild hypothermia. Former Navy SEAL, now working private security. He told me he was one of 8 operatives who'd arrived in the area. They've been positioning themselves quietly around Port Haven for the past week. Mike's eyes widened. You mean she has backup? I mean, Walsh corrected with a grim smile. The harbor wolves are sailing into an ambush they've designed for themselves. Hayes isn't the prey in this scenario. She's the bait. By mid-afternoon, a procession of boats slipped out of Port Haven Harbor in staggered departures. First the harbor wolves' sleek vessels bristling with visible firepower, then the more weathered but determined craft of the local fishermen, and finally Sheriff Reynolds' personal speedboat, cutting through the waves with single-minded purpose. From the lighthouse keeper's quarters, Dr. Walsh tracked their progress through high-powered binoculars, occasionally speaking into a satellite phone with the measured precision of someone accustomed to official communications. Assets are moving as anticipated, he reported. Primary targets departed at 13:42 hours, with approximately 22 individuals distributed across 4 vessels. Civilian support elements are maintaining recommended distance. Local law enforcement. He paused, watching Reynolds' boat through the lenses. Status remains uncertain, but he's proceeding to the designated coordinates. The doctor listened to the response before adding, Understood. I'll maintain position and communication relay. Walsh out. Smuggler's Rest lived up to its historical reputation, a horseshoe-shaped cove sheltered by steep granite cliffs on 3 sides, with a narrow entrance channel requiring precise navigation. Dense pine forest crowded the cliff edges, providing natural concealment for anyone wishing to observe the water below. The cove's underwater terrain was equally treacherous, with submerged rock formations that had claimed numerous vessels piloted by captains unfamiliar with its secrets. It was here, in this natural fortress, that Elena Hayes had anchored the second wind, positioning her vessel in the exact center of the protected waters. From the deck, she appeared to be engaged in the mundane task of cleaning fishing gear, her movements unhurried and methodical as the Harbor Wolves' lead vessel approached the cove's entrance. Through high-powered optics, Silas Blackwell observed her from the bow of his flagship, the Black Cormorant. Her apparent lack of concern both puzzled and infuriated him. "She's just waiting for us," he muttered. "No defensive position, no attempt to hide or flee." "Told you she was crazy," Derek said, checking his weapon for the third time. "One woman against all of us?" Marcus Reed lowered his own binoculars, with a troubled expression. "Something's not right. I've surveilled enough military personnel to recognize the demeanor. She's too calm, too prepared." "You think it's a trap?" Hammerhead Turner asked, scanning the cliffs with suspicious eyes. "I think," Reed replied carefully, "that someone with her background doesn't make tactical mistakes. She chose this location deliberately. She wanted us to follow her here." Silas considered this assessment, his mind calculating probabilities and contingencies with the precision that had kept him ahead of both competitors and law enforcement for years. "Deploy the drones," he ordered finally. "Full sweep of the cliffs and surrounding waters before we commit our vessels to that channel." Within minutes, 2 commercial-grade drones launched from the Black Cormorant's deck, their cameras feeding real-time imagery to monitors in the vessel's cabin. The first drone surveyed the cliffs, revealing nothing but pine trees and nesting seabirds disturbed by the mechanical intrusion. The second drone, equipped with a thermal imaging camera, swept the waters surrounding the cove's entrance. The operator frowned at the readings. "Boss, I'm getting some strange temperature variations in the water here and here." He indicated 2 spots flanking the narrow entrance. "Could be nothing. Cold water upwellings, maybe." "Or divers," Reed suggested quietly. "Navy combat divers? Can remain submerged for extended periods with rebreathers that leave no surface bubbles." Silas's expression hardened. "Continue the sweep. Check every inch of those cliffs. If this is an ambush, I want to know where they're hiding before we commit." As the drones continued their reconnaissance, Elena's voice suddenly crackled over the marine radio. "Harbor Wolves vessels. This is Commander Elizabeth Thorne, United States Navy." Her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. "You are currently approaching a restricted area under federal jurisdiction. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded." The use of her real name and rank confirmed what many had suspected, but the boldness of her announcement left even Silas momentarily speechless. Derek recovered first, grabbing the radio handset. "Listen, lady, I don't care if you're the admiral of the whole damn Navy. You're alone, outnumbered, and about to learn why no one threatens the Blackwells in their own backyard." A short laugh answered him. "Who said I was alone?" As if choreographed, a series of events unfolded in rapid succession. 2 Coast Guard vessels appeared on the horizon, approaching rapidly from the southeast. Simultaneously, 4 figures in tactical gear emerged from concealed positions along the cliffs, the afternoon sun glinting off the scopes of their positioned rifles. Most alarming to the Harbor Wolves, the water around their vessels erupted as 6 combat divers surfaced in coordinated precision, magnetic mines clearly visible in their gloved hands, devices already attached to the hulls of the Blackwells. "Boats. As you can see," Commander Thorne continued over the radio, her voice calm as if discussing the weather. "Your vessels are currently sitting above enough explosives to ensure you'll be diving this location for the next century. Those are magnetic. Mines controlled by a dead man switch. If any of my people are harmed, the mines detonate automatically." On the Black Cormorant's deck, chaos erupted as the Harbor Wolves processed their predicament. Gunmen raised their weapons instinctively, only to find laser sights from the cliff snipers dancing across their chests. "I wouldn't," Thorne advised. "My team consists of former Navy SEALs, Marine Force Recon, and Coast Guard Maritime Security Specialists. They can put a bullet through your eye at this distance without spilling your drink." In the cabin, Silas Blackwell maintained his composure with visible effort, mind racing through dwindling options. "What do you want?" he asked finally, taking the radio from his brother's hand. "Justice," came the simple reply. "For the people of Port Haven, for every fishing family you've terrorized, every boat you've sabotaged, every life you've threatened or ruined." "We haven't been convicted of anything," Silas countered smoothly. "And harassment of legitimate businessmen could constitute a serious overstep of federal authority. Your lawyers will be quite busy," Thorne interrupted. "Considering the evidence we've assembled, financial records of your protection schemes provided by Harbor Master Jensen in exchange for immunity, testimony from Dr. Walsh about injuries consistent with organized assault rather than fishing accidents, documentation of your systematic intimidation of local fishermen, and most damning, your brother's fingerprints on the shaped charge used to sabotage Jake Peterson's boat." The radio fell silent as the implications sank in. Across the Harbor Wolves' vessels, the recognition that they had sailed into a meticulously planned trap began to dawn. "You've been investigating us for months," Silas realized, speaking more to himself than into the radio. "Operation Seawall never ended, Mr. Blackwell. It evolved. From the moment your organization expanded beyond simple smuggling into systemic corruption and terrorizing civilian populations, you became our priority target." As the standoff continued, the contingent of fishing boats from Port Haven appeared around the headland, maintaining distance but forming a symbolic blockade behind the Harbor Wolves' vessels, cutting off any potential retreat. Silas observed this development with growing comprehension. "You turned the whole town against us." "No," Thorne corrected. "You did that yourself. Every time you destroyed someone's livelihood, every time you threatened a family, every time you corrupted an official sworn to protect them. I just showed them they weren't alone in fighting back." On the Black Cormorant's deck, Derek Blackwell's legendary temper finally erupted. Shoving aside the crewman beside him, he raised his assault rifle toward Thorne's distant figure. "Enough of this federal bullshit," he shouted. Multiple shots rang out simultaneously, not from Derek's weapon, but from the positioned snipers. The precision was surgical. 2 rounds struck the rifle, shattering it and sending fragments skittering across the deck. Another round passed so close to Derek's ear that it left a burning sensation without breaking skin. A 4th bullet embedded itself in the deck between his feet. "That," Thorne's voice came calmly over the radio, "was a warning demonstration. The next shots will not be designed to spare you." In the shocked silence that followed, Sheriff Reynolds's speedboat approached the Harbor Wolves' position. He stood at the helm, his expression grim but resolved, service weapon visibly holstered. "Silas Blackwell," he called out formally. "I'm here to place you and your associates under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, assault, destruction of property, and attempted murder. Please instruct your men to drop their weapons and surrender peacefully." A bitter laugh escaped Silas. "Now, you find your backbone, Thomas? After years of looking the other way?" "Better late than never," Reynolds answered simply. "And I'll be answering for my part in all this too. Commander Thorne has made that quite clear." From her position on the second wind, Elizabeth Thorne watched the unfolding surrender with the composed demeanor of someone who had orchestrated many such operations. One by one, the Harbor Wolves laid down their weapons, their vaunted intimidation evaporating in the face of overwhelming tactical disadvantage. As Coast Guard personnel began boarding the criminal vessels, Thorne received a transmission through her earpiece. "Commander, we have a situation," came the tense report from one of the cliff positions. 2 additional vessels approaching rapidly from the northwest, heavy weapons visible on deck. Thorne raised her binoculars to confirm the report. Two high-speed craft were indeed approaching, sleek, black, and clearly not part of the local fishing fleet. "Reinforcements," she murmured. "The Blackwell's insurance policy." Making a quick decision, she switched to a secure channel on her tactical radio. "All units, we have incoming hostiles. Cliff team, maintain overwatch on primary targets. Dive team, prepare to intercept new vessels if they enter the containment zone. Coast Guard assets, request immediate air support." As her team acknowledged, "Orders," Thorne turned her attention to the gathered boats from Port Haven. The civilians had placed themselves in potential danger by coming, motivated by a newfound courage she had helped inspire. She couldn't allow them to become casualties. Using the Marine Band radio, she addressed them directly. "Port Haven vessels, this is Commander Thorne. You need to withdraw to a safe distance immediately. Additional hostile forces are approaching from the northwest." To her frustration, the fishing boats didn't retreat. Instead, they began repositioning, forming a more deliberate blockade across the cove entrance. From the lead vessel, Old Man Mackenzie's voice crackled over the radio. "Begging your pardon, Commander, but we didn't come all this way to turn tail at the first sign of trouble. Port Haven stands together now." Thorne recognized the resolve in his voice, the same determination that had allowed generations of New England fishermen to survive the Atlantic's merciless conditions. Before she could argue further, Maggie O'Malley's voice joined the conversation from another boat. "Commander, while you've been setting your trap, we've been gathering evidence too. Every family in Port Haven has documented what the Blackwells did to them. We're not just witnesses, we're victims demanding justice. We have a right to see this through." Watching the approaching threat through her binoculars, Thorne calculated options and risks with the rapid assessment skills that had elevated her through naval ranks. The reinforcement vessels would arrive in approximately 7 minutes, too soon for Coast Guard air support to intercept. A tactical solution crystallized in her mind. "Port Haven vessels, maintain your current formation, but be prepared to disperse." "On my command," she instructed. "This isn't over yet." With swift precision, she moved to the second wind's helm, firing up engines that had been specifically modified for performance well beyond what the vessel's weathered exterior suggested. As the boat surged forward, she opened a secure channel. To her operation team, "Change of plans. I'm moving to intercept the incoming targets before they reach the civilian vessels. Cliff team, shift fire support to cover my approach. Dive team, stand by with remaining charges." "Commander," came the concerned response from her operations second. "That's not advisable. Your vessel isn't armored for direct engagement." "Neither are those fishing boats," she replied firmly. "And I won't have civilians in the crossfire. Execute the revised plan." As the second wind cut through the water with surprising speed, Elizabeth Thorne stood tall at the helm, her posture revealing the naval commander beneath the fisherwoman's disguise. For the first time since arriving in Port Haven, she allowed herself to embrace fully the identity she had concealed, not just in title or authority, but in the complete tactical awareness and command presence that had once guided a fleet. The way. Second wind surged through the water toward the approaching hostile vessels, its engines producing a deeper, more powerful roar than any standard fishing trawler should possess. From the deck of the Black Cormorant, now under Coast Guard control, Silas Blackwell watched with grudging professional appreciation. "That's not just a fishing boat," he muttered to no one in particular. "Military-grade propulsion system disguised as commercial equipment. She's been playing us from the beginning." A Coast Guard officer securing his restraints responded with a cold smile. "Commander Thorne has a reputation for attention to detail. There isn't a single aspect of this operation she hasn't planned for." As the gap closed between the second wind and the incoming reinforcements, the true capabilities of the seemingly modest fishing vessel became apparent. Hidden compartments along the gunnels dropped away to reveal mounted weapons systems that definitely weren't on any civilian. Maritime Registry, The boat's handling displayed a level of maneuverability that spoke of extensive hull modifications and specialized steering systems. Through binoculars, those watching from shore and surrounding vessels could see Commander Thorne at the helm, her posture transformed from the casual stance of a fisherwoman to the unmistakable bearing of a naval officer. She moved with practiced efficiency, activating systems and positioning her craft with the precision of someone who had commanded vessels through combat zones. The lead reinforcement boat altered course slightly, attempting to come alongside the second wind rather than meeting it head-on, a standard tactical approach for boarding operations. As they drew closer, a man with a megaphone appeared on their deck. "Federal vessel, cut your engines and prepare to be boarded by authority of the Maritime Security Agency." From the cliff positions, the operation's second-in-command focused his high-powered optics on the approaching boat, noting details with growing concern. "Commander, they're flying federal colors and claiming MSA authority," he reported through the secure channel, "but their configuration doesn't match any standard MSA vessel profile." "Because they're not MSA," Thorne responded calmly. "The Maritime Security Agency is a fiction created by the Blackwells to provide cover for their more aggressive operations. False credentials, forged documentation, and enough official-looking equipment to intimidate locals who don't know the difference." She adjusted course slightly, positioning the second wind to maintain optimal distance from both approaching vessels. "Blackwell Reinforcements, this is Commander Elizabeth Thorne, United States Navy, Bureau of Naval Intelligence." Her voice carried across the water with practiced authority. "You are displaying false federal insignia, a federal offense under maritime law. Cut your engines and surrender, or you will be treated as hostile combatants." The response came in the form of a warning shot that struck the water 10 feet from the second wind's bow. On the trailing reinforcement vessel, crew members began taking up firing positions behind mounted shields. "So much for peaceful resolution," Thorne muttered, then switched to her tactical channel. "All units, hostile intent confirmed. Cliff Team, you are cleared to disable the engines on both target vessels. Dive Team, deploy remaining charges for containment, not destruction." What followed demonstrated why Elizabeth Thorne had earned her reputation in naval operations. With the precision timing that comes only from extensive experience, multiple systems activated simultaneously. The snipers positioned on the cliffs fired synchronized shots that struck the engine compartments of both hostile vessels, causing immediate mechanical failures. As the boats began to drift, the combat divers who had been silently repositioning during the confrontation emerged alongside them, attaching magnetic mines to their hulls just as they had with the Harbor Wolves boats. From the second wind, Thorne deployed a specialized net launcher, technology adapted from whale research vessels but modified for maritime interdiction. The reinforced carbon fiber net expanded in midair before draping over the lead vessel, effectively entangling its deck-mounted weapons and preventing the crew from using them. The second vessel attempted evasive maneuvers despite its damaged engine, only to find itself caught in a carefully positioned trap. Floating barriers that had been deployed by the dive team during the initial confrontation, designed to corral vessels into a controlled area. Within minutes, what had appeared to be a potentially deadly confrontation transformed into another demonstration of overwhelming tactical advantage. The Coast Guard vessels, now freed from processing the primary Harbor Wolves boats, moved to secure the reinforcements. "I'd expect better operational security from a group with your resources," Thorne addressed the captured reinforcement leader, as Coast Guard personnel secured his vessel. "False federal credentials might work on isolated fishing communities, but they tend to fall apart when facing actual federal agents." The man glared back defiantly. "You've got no idea what you're stepping into, lady. The Blackwells have protection that goes all the way to Senator Morrison's office, through his chief of staff Gerald Parker, who receives monthly payments, through a shell corporation registered in the Caymans," Thorne finished for him, "and to Regional Director Hamilton at the Maritime Enforcement Division, who conveniently redirects patrols away from your smuggling routes. We know." The man's expression faltered for the first time. Those protective arrangements are being dismantled as we speak, she continued. Simultaneous operations are targeting Blackwell operations and corrupt officials across 4 states. This isn't just about Port Haven. It's about removing an entire network. As the last of the reinforcements were secured, Commander Thorne guided the second wind back to the center of the cove. The fishing vessels from Port Haven remained in formation, their presence a powerful symbol of a community reclaiming its waters. With the threat neutralized, many broke into spontaneous cheers and applause, the sound echoing off the granite cliffs in a cathartic release of years of suppressed fear. Sheriff Reynolds approached in his boat as Thorne anchored, his expression a complex mixture of shame and relief. "Commander," he acknowledged with the respect her rank demanded. "I don't know what to say." "Actions speak louder than words, Sheriff," she replied. "You've taken the first step toward redemption today. What matters now is what you do tomorrow, and all the days after." Reynolds nodded solemnly. "I'll be submitting my resignation, of course, but before that, I intend to file complete reports on every instance where I failed to uphold the law, every time I looked the other way. The people of Port Haven deserve that truth." "Yes, they do," Thorne agreed, "but they also deserve leadership. Consider carefully whether resignation is truly the most responsible course. Rebuilding trust is harder than walking away." As Coast Guard cutters began escorting the captured vessels back toward Port Haven, the local fishing boats drew alongside the second wind. Old Man Mackenzie's weathered face broke into a grin that erased decades of hardship. "Never thought I'd live to see the day," he called over. "The Blackwells taken down, and by someone they thought was just another easy target." "That was their fundamental mistake," Thorne replied. "Underestimating people they deemed insignificant." Standing. On Maggie O'Malley's boat, Dr. Walsh, now clearly operating in his capacity as a naval consultant, approached the second wind. "Operation complete, Commander," he reported formally. "All primary and secondary targets secured. Minimal collateral damage, no civilian casualties." "And Port Haven?" she asked. Walsh smiled slightly. "I believe the technical term is no longer compromised, though liberated might be more accurate." As the impromptu flotilla made its way back to harbor, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the water, Elizabeth Thorne stood at the helm of her disguised vessel, observing the community that had found its courage. What had begun as a covert operation to dismantle a criminal network had evolved into something more profound, the resurrection of a town's spirit. Port Haven Harbor was crowded with onlookers as the procession returned. Word had spread rapidly, drawing people from throughout the region to witness the harbor wolves' downfall. Coast Guard personnel efficiently processed the detained criminals, transferring them to transport vehicles under the watchful eyes of newly arrived federal agents. Among the gathered crowd, families reunited with those who had stood up against the Blackwells. The Mackenzies, the Donovans, the Martinezes, all those who had suffered under the harbor wolves' reign now watched as justice finally arrived on their shores. Commander Thorne docked the second wind in its regular slip, moving with the same efficient precision she had maintained throughout her time in Port Haven. As she secured the vessel, a group of naval personnel in unmarked uniforms approached, led by a distinguished older man whose bearing marked him as senior command. "Admiral," she acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Commander Thorne," he returned formally, before allowing a smile to warm his official demeanor. "Exemplary work, as always, though perhaps a bit more dramatic than outlined in the operational parameters." "The situation evolved, sir," she responded, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Adaptation was required." "So I see." The Admiral surveyed the harbor, noting the mixture of federal agents, local civilians, and captured criminals. "Your after-action report should make interesting reading." Maggie O'Malley approached hesitantly, clearly intimidated by the official presence but determined nonetheless. Excuse me, she addressed both naval officers. What happens now? To Porty Haven, I mean. The Admiral deferred to Thorne with a slight gesture. That depends largely on all of you, Thorne answered. The Blackwell's operation has been dismantled, but communities need more than the absence of corruption to thrive. They need active engagement, collective responsibility, leadership with integrity. We've learned something about standing together, Maggie said, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. The harbor wolves took root here because we were isolated, from each other, from outside help. That changes today. Other townspeople gathered around, nodding in agreement. Old Man Mackenzie stepped forward, the elected spokesperson by unspoken consensus. We want you to know, Commander, he said, that what you did here won't be forgotten. Not just the taking down of the Blackwells, but showing us that we didn't have to accept their boot on our necks. That's a lesson that'll outlast any arrest. Thorne accepted his words with a subtle incline of her head. The greatest protection against predators like the Blackwells isn't federal agents or military operations, Mr. Mackenzie. It's communities that refuse to be divided, that stand together against intimidation. As the day drew to a close, Elizabeth Thorne completed the formal turnover of the operation to regular law enforcement channels. The deception that had been her life for the past months, the disguise of Elena Hayes, struggling fisherwoman, was meticulously dismantled. The Second Wind, revealed now as a sophisticated tactical platform disguised as a commercial vessel, was being prepared for transport back to naval facilities. Dr. Walsh found her on the dock, watching the sunset, paint the harbor in shades of amber and gold. Your transport leaves in an hour, Commander, he informed her. Though I understand there's some debate at headquarters about your next assignment. There always is, she replied with the faintest hint of amusement. The Admiralty remains divided on whether my methods are brilliant or reckless. The results speak for themselves. Walsh gestured toward the transformed harbor, where locals were already reclaiming spaces once dominated by the harbor wolves. This operation dismantled not just the Blackwell's immediate criminal enterprise but their entire regional network. Corruption exposed, smuggling routes compromised, political protection neutralized. And more importantly, Thorne added, a community remembered its own strength. As twilight deepened over Port Haven, Commander Elizabeth Thorne, decorated, naval officer, tactical innovator, the woman who had single-handedly baited and trapped the notorious harbor wolves, prepared to depart as quietly as she had arrived. But the legend that would remain would be anything but quiet. They still tell the story in fishing communities all along the coast of how outlaws stole a woman's fishing boat, never suspecting she had once commanded a fleet. How a town found its courage by following her example. How the harbor wolves, in their arrogance, mistook a disguised weapon for an easy target. It's become something of a cautionary tale in these parts, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. That strength often hides behind unassuming facades, and that even the smallest harbors can harbor the greatest surprises. Some say on stormy nights, when the wind howls off the Atlantic and the harbor grows restless, you can still feel her presence. A guardian spirit watching over these waters, ensuring that what was reclaimed is never surrendered again. And if you find yourself in Port Haven today, you'll notice something special about the fishing fleet. Each vessel, from the smallest dinghy to the largest trawler, bears a small insignia near its helm, a stylized anchor surrounded by a breaking wave. They call it Thorne's Mark, a silent acknowledgement of the commander who taught them that true power comes not from intimidation, but from standing together against the storm. If this story of courage and justice resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more tales of extraordinary individuals who changed their communities forever. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes the most powerful forces work quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. Until next time, remember, The strongest tides are often the ones you never see coming.